Cyber Vault. We're very excited to be here at the RSA conference in San Francisco. Today I have Matt with me. We are going to be talking a little bit about the world of venture capital, startups, and kind of what it takes to get some funding in this crazy world of cybersecurity. Matt, thank you for coming on with us today. Why don't you start off and maybe tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, again, Matt Carbonara, nice to meet you, Katie. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I've been investing in cyber for the last decade or so now, and I've been in investment roles for the last 20 years at various either traditional funds or corporate funds, most recently at Citibank Ventures, at Citi Ventures.
Awesome. Well, lovely to have you here, and yeah, very sunny day that we're here, and I think kind of some exciting topics to talk about. But Matt, maybe let's kind of start with how you got into the world of VC, because I think it's an exciting space to be in. You've obviously been specialising and focusing on kind of a lot of those cybersecurity businesses. But yeah, maybe give us a bit of an introduction to how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting. I think there's lots of paths to get into venture, and everybody's is unique, and my story, just like that, is also unique. I was a technical person by training, so I'm kind of a nerd, and people would probably even say I'm kind of a nerd today. I was a BS and MS in electrical engineering, so I was a chip designer when I first got out of school, and actually my first job was here in the Valley at a company founded by two Israeli brothers.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't a cyber company, but it was a company in the communication system space. And I was a 10th employee, and I was there all the way till the time it went public. But a key moment for me was about a month into that experience, the CEO called us all into our kitchen room, and he passed around this check for $8 million. And it was our next round of financing. It was from Sequoia and Weispeck and Greer, which is now Lightspeed, and some other firms. And I was like, one, pretty cool, these people believe in us enough to give us money to continue to execute on this project. Two, who gets to make those decisions? And that sounds like a pretty cool idea, getting to work at the meta level and look at different companies and see, how are markets shifting, how is technology changing, which companies do you think are going to be able to execute, and who's going to win? And that was kind of my first inkling of like, oh, maybe I don't want to be an engineer the rest of life. Maybe there are some interesting business problems to solve, including being a venture investor. And so I was there from the time it was 10 employees till it was a public company, great experience. And I was lucky enough at the end of that experience to get recruited by a venture fund that was looking to invest in semis and comm systems. And since I was a chip designer at a comm systems company, they're like, oh, come and help us diligence these opportunities, because you can sit across from entrepreneurs. You've kind of walked in their shoes because you've been at an early stage startup that faced death every 18 months, so you know what that's like. And you also can help us diligence and understand, can they build this? What are the pitfalls going to be? What questions should we be asking, given that you've worked on these type of projects before?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it's exciting, and I think kind of what an incredible transition to kind of go from like that more technically driven role into the world of venture, because it is quite a pivot, but I suppose there's a lot of similarities in terms of the skill sets that you need, or the understanding you have to have of, okay, I know what it's like you say, to go through the life cycle, but it's different being in business when you're 5, 10, 15 people to then when it's 50, to then when it's 100, and so on. It's it's constantly having to adapt to the way that you work. And obviously kind of you've now been in that world for such a long time. I think it'd be really interesting to kind of explore, because you've got an impressive portfolio of businesses that you've invested in, some of them doing spectacularly kind of well, so obviously you had a good eye for what to look for. So maybe kind of let's pivot into what is it that, while you've been on that journey, what is it that's helped you identify those businesses to qualify for, okay, these guys look like they might be going somewhere?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think that's evolved over time for me as I've learned more and more about the space. And I think at the different firms that I've been at, sometimes traditional firms, sometimes corporate firms, I've gained additional insights from the people I've had the opportunity to work with there. I think what I look for, and what I think helps get investors excited, is one, having like a unique perspective on a customer problem, and a point of view on how to solve that problem. Second would be, is the way how's that problem solution that you have, how does that compare to the status quo or the competition that's solving it today, and is it incrementally, significantly better? That's the second area to look at. I think third would be, where does that problem that the customer has, where does it rank in terms of their priority? Is it really a number 1 or 2? Because many times companies have a lot of budget, but the budget goes to run the business, existing projects, and there's limited budget for new new line items. And so I think, figuring out how you break into the top, or you're addressing a problem that's a one or a two for them, I think is really important. I think demonstrating that you have a sort of validated and unique, or I'll say a deep perspective on who's the buyer of the product, and what is their incentive, and then who is the user, who's the persona that's the user or users, and what's the benefit to them.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. And then I would say finally, because they're business buyers, they're not consumers, the ROI, what's the return on investment, what is the economics of purchasing the solution for the buyer, because obviously they're going to have to make a business case to somebody in the organization, a CFO or somebody to sign off on it ultimately, right?
Yeah.
So I think those are the 5 or 6 things that we're typically looking for. And then I think, in cyber, you find that there's a lot of companies that are maybe a little more, I'll say, niche-y type of solutions. So I think if you can paint a vision that's, hey, we're going to start here, but it's a broader platform over time, then I think that's what gets investors really excited, because then they say, okay, this could be a really large public company someday.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people are ultimately, really, really get excited about.
Yeah, for sure. And I suppose kind of the trends that we've often been seeing, specifically within cyber, is that fact of a unified platform. Kind of, the businesses these days are actively wanting to seek less vendors, because then, if you've got 25 different points of contact and you're always having to go to them, it's complicated. So if you can kind of bring that under one umbrella, it's a bit of a no-brainer. And arguably, I suppose, it's kind of, you can see why the trend's going in that direction. And I suppose what could also be really interesting to kind of just tag on to at the back end of that is, because what it sounds like is a lot of these businesses, preparation is clearly key. By the time if you're looking for these funding things, you need to have these ready. You need to have those points. You're obviously going to get asked about it. So be prepared to kind of, I suppose, demonstrate the fact that, okay, I can tick these boxes. But I think kind of once you've got funding secured, it doesn't end there. The journey's still ongoing. It could maybe just be interesting to quickly dive into how do you continue that success once, okay, we've got our Series A round with you, but eventually they're going to want to get to Series B, and so what are the expectations that you as an investor would have with that business, and maybe how can they kind of make sure that you want to stay invested in them as they continue to grow? Yeah,
I think it's a great point. I think that the metrics I gave earlier apply to all businesses, but maybe a little bit more at the early stage, the seed stage. I think as you get to the later stage, then people start to look at, okay, how fast is this business growing? Because that is sort of a culmination of, well, how strong is the need on behalf of the customers, and how strong is the product market fit? I think people also look a lot at SaaS metrics to understand how efficient is the growth, right?
Yeah.
So is the company having to spend a lot of money to grow, or are they growing efficiently? And I think the more efficient you can grow, that makes investors feel more excited about. So I think looking at the SaaS metrics and looking at the growth, as well as ability to execute on additional on the product roadmap, and then how is the team executing, and how's the team recruiting? Are you recruiting the right people, which I think is really, really important, and are you able to recruit A players from other great cyber companies? I think that's really a great indication. Talent is relatively efficient in how it moves around the industry, and when people say, hey, that's a great product and that company's going somewhere, you'll see great talent go there, and that's usually a great sign that the company's really onto something. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we could agree more with that statement, because I think one unique perspective we often have is we know where the talent wants to go. We get people calling us up being like, do you work with these guys? Because I want to join them, kind of thing. And I think that can often be a key trend to recognise that, okay, this is, or if we're going, we're working with this startup and they're going to be scaling, and they go, that sounds unbelievable, know that there's definitely some attraction there. Okay, awesome. And I suppose then to kind of pivot, because one thing that we've kind of referenced at the back end there is the trend thing. It's not just, I suppose, talent that follows the cool products, but naturally there is that cycle of, there's always a hot topic within not just kind of security, but any technical vertical. And we're at RSA right now. I think we've got some really exciting things that are going to be spoken about this week, and some businesses, we've seen multiple that have recently secured some early stage funding, which I think is exciting. But in addition to that, we've got a lot of these businesses, a lot of early stage startups that are being represented at the conference. So I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on what do you think some of the key trends we're going to be seeing this week are, and maybe kind of what some of the standout vendors may be doing to
differentiate from the very big crowd we've got in the centre over there.
There's a lot of companies. It's always a noisy space. You always think there's too many vendors, but there's always winners. And you said, I think the bar is also going up, as you said, Katie, with around consolidation, right? I think customers want to consolidate. They want to have things together. So that just raises the bar even more. For somebody to adopt something that's not from their existing vendor, the bar becomes very high. You know, when I think about, if I just take a step back and think about how I think about the cyber landscape, there's really 7 or 8 big markets that can support large companies in sub-segments of cyber, if you will, right? So there's endpoint, cloud, data, email, IAG, application security, services, security services.
Yes.
So you get 7 or 8 big markets. And I think you kind of, that's the framework for evaluating, okay, like where do these companies fit? And then I think what we look for is companies that can either, and I'll come to some examples, that can either sort of have a different take on one of those markets, like Sneak did with application security. They did it by going to the developer, right? So they disrupted application security by really serving the developer persona and that move to developer primacy that was happening in the enterprise. Or companies where they pull from multiple buckets of those spend buckets that I mentioned, those 7 or 8 markets, like an Island would be a company that did that, for example, where, hey, we take web security and put it in the browser. We take data security, DLP, and put it in the browser. We take some elements of zero trust and put it in the browser. We take some elements of network security, put it in the browser, right? So they're sort of collapsing multiple pieces into a new product. And so those are kind of the 2 paradigms I look for. The things that I'm excited about at RSA this year, I think one is social protection against social engineering for your employees, and even for consumers to some extent, but more on the employee side just because I'm an enterprise person, and protecting them both inside and outside of the enterprise. But we know with generative AI in the hands of bad actors that the phishing emails, the different modalities of attacks, the video attacks, the voice attacks are going to get more sophisticated and are going to be, and the human is always sort of the weakest link, unfortunately. And so I think things that can protect those and train those employees to spot these things, and also protect these employees to understand when they're being manipulated or when they're looking at something that's been generated by a large language model, or video model or audio model, I think is going to be really important. So I think that's a very exciting space, I think, just given that we know that the threats are going to be more and that the humans are always the weakest link. So that's one area. I think the other interesting thing with generative AI is that it makes a lot of things that were human capital intensive, much more attractive businesses and able to be done more frequently and lower cost. So as you think about that security services market, it could be things like pen testing. So the ability to automate pen testing. So if you could do pen testing automatically, you could run it more frequently. Every day. You could run it in QA instead of in production, or you could shift it left. So I think that's really interesting. I would also say some of the security services that like MSSPs provide, so having products that you sell to those MSSPs or MSSPs that are powered by some of these automation and agentic capabilities, I think is also a really, really interesting area too. And I think you can take these businesses that have traditionally been more human capital intensive and transform them into more software type of businesses, which I think is exciting. And I think the last space would be AI security, right? I think everybody's wondering what's happening there, although we saw an announcement from Palo Alto this morning about that. But I think that's in its nascent stages and continues. I think that market's up for grabs, and I think there's still going to be a lot to happen there. Because that's a new application in the enterprise, and I think anytime you have a new application, it creates new threat vectors, and you have new threat vectors, you need new defenses, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something I often talk about, and it's kind of like a bit of a running joke, I think, in security, but it's always the fact that ultimately, just because you see the advertisement that the good guys have the technology, because that's what vendors are talking about, but also the bad guys half the time, and more often than not, they're already ahead of you, and you don't quite realise it until you've created it, and then you're like, oh, they're already doing that to us. We just didn't know that vulnerability was there. And I agree with kind of what pretty much everything that you've said there. I think Gen AI and the application of that within how businesses are growing and the startups are being able to use that, especially, suddenly you don't need these massive coding teams anymore. But I think people often also forget about the fact that there's a security element to that. If you're building your application with a couple of developers and heavily relying on kind of AI, are we assessing kind of the right, or are we doing it in the most secure way? So I think there's going to be a whole host of super exciting things this week, and hopefully upon coming Thursday, Friday, we'll all be really excited about what the next year's got in.
Yeah, it's a dual-edged
store.
sword too, and I mean, you see some of these companies that are like, hey, we have 40 people and we're doing 40 million in ARR, which is super exciting, or more, maybe even more, right? In the case of companies like Cursor, and then. But at the same time, I think if you have machines writing a lot of code, I think there are implications for that elsewhere in the software development lifecycle that I think people need to get their minds around and figure out how to address.
Absolutely, yeah. There's going to be a few bumps in the road, that's for sure. But I suppose that's what makes it all the more exciting. If you could easily predict what was going to happen, it wouldn't quite be as fun to work in. But thank you for your time today, Matt.
Thank you, Katie.
It's been a pleasure. I think, like I say, going to be a very exciting week, and we'll see, I suppose, kind of what comes out at the end.
I'm looking forward to it, and it should be it's energizing to be here every year, so I'm excited to see what the week reveals.
Yeah, absolutely, and the weather helps as well, doesn't it? The gorgeous sunshine coming out in San Francisco. But it's obviously, it's been a pleasure having Matt on, and make sure to keep updated. We'll have plenty of content coming out with updates going on at RSA.